United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H.R. 958, introduced by Representative Tom O'Halloran of Arizona, H.R. 6237, introduced by myself, H.R. 6535, also introduced by myself, and H.R. 7119, introduced by Representative Don Young of Alaska. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. And hearing no objections, so ordered. As described in hearing notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Again, that's hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As within our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. Good morning, and thank you to our witnesses for traveling here or logging in remotely to testify at this hearing. Today, we'll be hearing from witnesses on 4 pieces of legislation that will ensure the safety and health of Native people, including Native veterans, in the midst of a global pandemic. First up, we have H.R. 458, the Native Youth and Tribal Officer Protection Act, introduced by my friend and good colleague from Arizona, Mr. O'Halloran. The Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2013 authorized tribes to exercise criminal jurisdiction to arrest and prosecute non-Indians for domestic violence, dating violence, and violations of protection orders if certain conditions are met. Since its passage, tribes have identified 3 gaps in the 2013 VAWA law that Congress must address to bolster the ability of tribal governments to protect domestic violence victims, Native children, and tribal law enforcement officers. H.R. 958 addresses these gaps by restoring tribal jurisdiction over crimes against children, as well as crimes against tribal officials in the course of exercising tribal VAWA jurisdiction. It also clarifies definitions to ensure tribes can prosecute, threaten, and attempted domestic violence. Next, we will examine a bill introduced with Representative Mullen of Oklahoma, H.R. 6237, the PRC for Native Veterans Act. This bipartisan bill will ensure that Native veterans can access high-quality care regardless of where they choose to seek it. Access to health care is something that is promised to Native veterans, part of our trust responsibility for tribes, and something these heroes have earned through service to our nation. H.R. 6237 to expand the services the VA is required to reimburse to include purchase and referred care received by Native veterans through IHS and tribally run facilities. Under the current system, Native veterans who arrive at IHS or tribal facilities needing specialty care are often forced to travel to extreme distances to the nearest VA facility for a redundant primary care visit and referral. Continuing to force this vulnerable population outside of their community, especially in the time of COVID, to seek care is especially dangerous, and especially in this time of social distancing. Native veterans should have timely access to all the quality care they need, no matter where they choose to access it. This bill would also provide critical resources to a severely underfunded tribal health system that is experiencing incredible strain due to the current pandemic. I am proud that this bill was passed in the House as a provision in the HEROES Act, and I look forward to discussing it as a standalone measure today. The second of my bills we are examining today is H.R. 6535, the Coverage for Urban Indian Healthcare Providers Act. This is a bipartisan measure that was supported in the President's 2021 budget proposal that would provide long overdue parity to urban Indian organizations under the Federal Tort Claims Act. The other 2 branches of the ITU system, federally and tribally run health facilities, are already covered by the Federal Claims Act. This bill would extend the same coverage to IOUs, thereby ending the practice requiring individual clinics to use their limited funds to purchase liability coverage. This fix would save UIOs up to $250,000 per year in coverage costs money that can be instead spent directly on patient care. This is especially important during the current crisis, which has hit UIOs extremely hard, with over 80% of clinics reporting cuts to services due to resource shortages. 70% of Native Americans today live in urban settings, making our support for urban Indian organizations essential to ensuring that healthcare is accessible to all Native people and that our trust responsibility is upheld. Finally, we have HR 7119, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium Land Transfer Act of 2020, introduced by the Dean of the House, Mr. Young from Alaska. The consortium provides comprehensive medical services at the Alaska Native Medical Center, including wellness programs, disease research and prevention, rural provider training, rural water and sanitation systems construction, and education, and health education. HR 7119 will allow the consortium to gain ownership over 2 parcels of land that are owned by the Department of Health and Human Services and are currently being used for maintenance and storage. Transfer of the land will allow the consortium to streamline its operations and construct building upgrades that will allow it to better serve Alaska Natives. These are all great pieces of legislation that are much needed in Indian country, and I hope that we can work together to expedite them through the committee and to the House floor. I look forward to hearing all the witnesses' testimony. I would now like to recognize Mr. Young for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding these hearings today. As you mentioned, these 4 bills should be non-controversial. I would encourage the chairman and myself and the ranking member on this committee to talk to the leadership, see if we can't get these bills on suspension. They're good bills, should be passed. I've looked at them all. The one in Alaska, you mentioned it very, very quickly. The land is being presently used, but they need to improve upon it, and to have that, they have to have free title to it. And that means we transfer that land to the consortium, the ANTHC, and that'll take place. I have a witness online of me, Andy Tupper, who's done an outstanding job on this consortium, and we continue to work with him to make sure that Alaska Natives are taken care of health-wise. I think we have one of the better systems in the United States right now in Alaska. I'm not saying it because of me, I'm saying it because of the leadership of the Alaska Natives themselves have taken and insisted upon it and managed it properly. So I again thank you for having this hearing. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now I'd like to turn to our first panel of witnesses. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Jason O'Neill, the Assistant Deputy Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services at the U.S. Department of Interior. Mr. O'Neill.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jason O'Neill, and I'm the Assistant Deputy Bureau Director for the Office of Justice Services, Bureau of Indian Affairs at the Department of Interior. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the Department regarding H.R. 958, the Native Youth and Tribal Protection Act. H.R. 958 amends the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968 to extend criminal jurisdiction of tribal courts over non-Indians to cover crimes including violence against children committed by their caregivers and against officers who respond to calls involving the exercise of tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. H.R. 958 also calls on the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Health and Human Services to coordinate with the Attorney General to ensure that federal programs support tribal justice systems and the provision of victim services work together, and that training materials on recognizing and responding to domestic violence are available to the bureaus that directly serve Indian country. The department supports these efforts to make tribal communities safer, including equipping tribes with additional tools to address criminal offenses occurring within Indian country. We welcome the opportunity to work with the committee to provide technical assistance. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. The chair now recognizes Rear Admiral Michael D. Wiaki, tell me if I said that incorrectly, the Director of Indian Health Services at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Pronunciation was perfect. Thank you, sir. And good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Young, and members of the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on H.R. 6237, the PRC for Native Veterans Act, H.R. 6535, the Coverage for Urban Indian Health Providers Act, and HR 7119, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium Land Transfer Act of 2020. I'll be brief and jump right to the bills. More of our comments on the three bills are included in our submitted written testimony. HR 6237, the Proper and Reimbursed Care for Native Veterans Act, would amend Section 405C of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act to clarify that the Department of Veterans Affairs and Department of Defense must reimburse IHS, Indian tribes, and tribal organizations for certain contract healthcare services, including patient travel costs. The bill refers to these costs as contract healthcare, but these costs can be paid for through the IHS's Purchased and Referred Care Program. Currently, the VA reimburses the Indian health provider for direct services provided to an eligible veteran in an IHS, Indian tribe, or tribal health organization facility. However, if a veteran needs services that are not available in one of these facilities, the veteran must either be referred back to the VA or the IHS pays for the contracted services through our PRC program. The IHS is not currently reimbursed for any purchased and referred care provided to our veterans. Similarly, IHS is not reimbursed for PRC care when it's used to provide services to an active duty military member. Since non-active duty DoD beneficiaries are covered under TRICARE, IHS would not approve PRC payment for that patient. Patients who are DoD beneficiaries usually work through their TRICARE coverage for care beyond what IHS offers as a direct service. Direct care for DoD beneficiaries provided by IHS or a tribal program is currently reimbursed by supplemental care for active duty members and for TRICARE beneficiaries at TRICARE rates. IHS is committed to working with our VA and DoD partners to strengthen the provision of health care to our nation's veterans and our DoD beneficiaries. HR 6535, the Coverage for Urban Indian Health Providers Act, would amend the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act to extend Federal Tort Claims Act coverage to urban Indian organizations by applying a section of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act to deem UIOs and their employees part of the Public Health Service. Congress must specifically authorize in statute the extension of federal tort claim coverage to certain groups or individuals. And currently, federal law extends FTCA coverage to ISDIA contractors, employees, and personal services contractors. Federal law does not provide tort liability coverage for injuries to urban American Indian and Alaska Native patients that result from the negligent acts of employees at UIOs providing health and medical services pursuant to a contract with or a grant from the Indian Health Service. IHS endorses the policy to extend FTCA coverage to urban Indian organizations. However, such coverage is generally conveyed through the Public Health Service Act, and IHS prefers taking that approach to extend coverage to UIOs. IHS would like to work with the subcommittee on technical changes to the bill to address the issues raised in our written testimony. HR 7119, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium Land Transfer Act of 2020, would provide conveyance by warranty deed of certain property to the ANTHC, a tribal organization that's provided IHS-funded healthcare services since 1999 under the authority of the ISDIA. Under HR 7119, the consortium would not provide the federal government with any consideration for the property, and the federal government would not be able to impose any obligation, term, or condition on the consortium with regard to the property. In addition, the federal government would not retain any reversionary interest in the property, and it also would require completing the conveyance no later than 180 days from enactment of the bill. HHS has determined that this timeframe would not provide sufficient time to fully complete the transfer. We've seen several bills of this sort move through Congress in recent years, and as with those previous bills, HHS is concerned about the details of HR 7119, which are outlined more specifically in our written testimony. HHS supports the purposes of the bill to convey the property to the consortium, and we'd like to work with the subcommittee on technical changes to the bill to address the issues raised in our written testimony. In closing, I want the subcommittee to know that the IHS remains firmly committed to improving the quality, safety, and access to healthcare for American Indians and Alaska Natives, and we appreciate all of your efforts in helping us to do so. Thank you, and again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today.
I thank the first panel witnesses for their testimony. Remind the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Admiral, your testimony mentions that IHS is currently working with the VA to, I quote, improve the coordination of care for veteran, American Indian, and Alaska Native patients that seek their primary care through IHS. I assume you're referring to the new MOU currently being negotiated between the VA and IHS. VA reimbursement for PRC services for Native veterans has long been requested by tribes and tribal organizations. Has IHS brought this topic up to discuss in the course of MOU negotiations? And if not, will you commit to doing so?
Thank you, Chairman. We've actually been involved with the VA in a new work group that's been formed on healthcare coordination, which includes representatives from IHS, VA, and from tribes. That work is really focused on getting rid of those delays in care between the systems. But in terms of your question specifically, we are looking at improving and ensuring that we use that umbrella MOA to encompass all aspects of care and to ensure that our veterans are getting everything that they need. So would commit to definitely looking at that and ensuring that we're taking that into account.
Great. Your testimony also mentions that tribes and IHS receive PRC funding to cover contract care. While this is true, data indicates that the funding is extremely insufficient to cover the existing need. According to NIHB at IHS facilities alone, in 2019, the PRC program denied over $600 million for an estimated 155,000 services for eligible patients. In these cases, the patients likely went without needed care. Given these numbers, yes or no, do you agree that PRC funding at IHS is insufficient?
Yes.
Thank you, and I appreciate your candid. Over 150,000 services that didn't happen because of PRC shortfalls, and I hope that my bill will help close that gap. In your estimation, do you think that this bill will at least be a good step to close that gap?
Absolutely. Any introduction of new resource to the system would be helpful.
Good. Thank you, Admiral. I'd also like to thank IHS for its support of expanding FTCA coverage to urban organizations. In what ways, obviously, if we can work out the finer details, in what ways might the passage of HR 6535 ensure that urban Indian organizations have the resources to continue providing and even expanding care for urban AIAN patients?
Yes, sir. Most immediately, it would alleviate the need for our urban Indian programs to utilize precious limited resources on malpractice insurance, as noted, up to $250,000 per individual location, multiplied across 41 different sites. That's a sizable sum of money that could be better expended on physicians, nurses, and specialty care. So most immediately, that funding could expand services, retain additional healthcare providers, et cetera.
Thank you. I now recognize our ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, I noticed in your suggestion that you said you needed more time. How much time do you need?
Yes, sir. Appreciate that. We were asking for 2 years. There's a comprehensive checklist of items that need to be administered, and most concerning is if we conduct some initial environmental assessments and there's any remediation needed. Could be diesel fuel, remediation of silica, lead, asbestos, any of those concerns. Under a warranty deed, we would need much more time to be able to achieve that. We've got a head start in Sitka with the Mount Edgecombe property, but the request for the Anchorage property is relatively new, and we would be starting from pretty close to ground zero on that.
Well, Admiral, I understand that, but my concern is I don't want to slow walk this. It's 3.5 acres, I believe. It's being presently used by the consortium, and you can do it if you wish to do it. I understand your need for it, but I don't like to see bureaucracy slow walk something. We've done this. I passed one of these in 2013, and it's, you can go back and use that as an example. I think it's already pretty expedited. So, we'll look at the 2 years. If it takes that long, I'll be surprised. I'd like to do it sooner, let's put it that way. If we give you 2 years, I want it done, but I'd like to have it done sooner. And I'll talk to the consortium, see what they think about the 2 years. If that's your biggest difference, this is for the benefit of the Alaska Native people. They've managed it well, and I think that, I presently use it for a distributing center. They want to use it for expansion, and they need to have the title to it before they can do it. So I appreciate that. And I have the other question later on, but thank you, Admiral. Just keep me in mind that this is my state. There's only one congressman, and I'm very anxious to get things done. I don't like to wait around, so we'll talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
I don't know if that was a threat or, and now I recognize the good representative from New Mexico, Representative Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. O'Neill, how would H.R. 958 affect the Bureau of Indian Affairs' own officer force if it passed into law?
Thank you for the question, Representative Holland. If I understand the question, it's how would it affect the BIA uniformed police officers? Is that the question? Okay. So certainly the department supports the legislation to protect our tribal law enforcement officers. Currently, BIA officers are covered from assault on a federal officer under current federal criminal law.
And Admiral Wiaki, do you believe that H.R. 6237 would streamline the administrative process for providing PRC services to Native veterans?
Without having a good close examination of exactly how that would work with our current system, any concentration on coordination between the IHS and VA would be welcomed. We definitely don't want to be sending our veterans back and forth between our two systems. So if they could be eligible outright for PRC, there would be no need to send them back and forth. So that kind of extra time would be alleviated.
Thank you. And Admiral Wiaki, if H.R. 6237 passed into law, what would this mean for on the ground? What would this mean on the ground for Native veterans seeking PRC services?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think really that's the major benefit is that we would see our Native veterans be able to obtain services within the communities that they live without having to travel to a facility that may be located in a far-off metropolitan area. So they'd be able to get a majority of their care there in the community that they're living in. It would also, for that program, we'd see an extension in the purchasing power of their Purchased and Referred Care Fund, as less of that funding would have to be used for veterans, so they could use it on other patients who needed that care and treatment.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here today. And Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I forgot to ask Mr. O'Neill, do you see any constitutionality problems in 958?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Young. Our office is currently consulting in reference to the specific legislation that we're discussing today. We do support the legislation to make tribal communities safer, and we're certainly happy to work closely with this committee to provide any technical assistance on any constitutional questions that might arise.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I was thinking about if we pass this law, maybe we ought to do a little review. I don't think there is a constitutional problem, but we don't want to cross that bridge. So we're trying to solve a problem and something we support, and we'll work together and see if we can write it so it isn't unconstitutional. If someone says it. See, lawyers have a habit of doing that. There'd be a lawsuit if you went to sleep at night, it was daylight, but anyway, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize Representative Case. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. I appreciate the hearing on these 4 solid bills. I'd like to focus, Admiral Wiaki, on H.R. 6535. Certainly, COVID-19 has exacerbated and highlighted the challenges facing our Native communities in healthcare. We have seen incredible healthcare disparities continuing and disproportionately impacting American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities. And that's the subject of my questions to you. Because as we look at the indigenous peoples of the United States, our Native Hawaiians are indigenous peoples of the United States. The United States has acknowledged and accepted a special trust responsibility to Native Hawaiians. There have been 200 some odd federal laws passed over the decades since that was recognized, one of which is the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvements Act, which was enacted in 1988, which set up Native Hawaiian healthcare centers. These centers are devoted to the same needs for the same reasons as Alaska Natives and Native Americans throughout the country. To confuse things a little bit, we also have Native Hawaiian community health centers and other comparable tribal organizations along the same model as American Indians and Alaska Natives, under which the Federal Tort Claims Act is applied to them. And they realize the benefits of the Federal Tort Claims Act that you have cited in your testimony. This particular bill would add urban Indian organizations to the list of folks that are entitled to federal tort claims protection, again, for the same reason, which is to simplify the claims and the settlement process and really control expenses in a centralized way. From my perspective and the perspective of our communities, there is absolutely no difference in function or purpose or anything else from a Native Hawaiian healthcare center perspective with any of the other indigenous peoples' healthcare services. And so this is indicated, for example, by the fact that in Hawaii itself, where we have Native Hawaiian healthcare centers, they actually contract with the Indian Health Service to provide services to Native Americans, Alaska Natives in Hawaii. So everybody's in the same boat. Everybody is experiencing the same results. And the question that I have for you is that under that circumstance, would you have any objections to Native Hawaiian healthcare centers being added to this bill as being covered under the Federal Tort Claims Act? Is there any reason that you can think of why that would not be a policy decision that we could make?
Thank you, Congressman Case. And in one of my roles as Indian Health Service Director, I serve as the Vice Chair of the Intradepartmental Council on Native American Affairs at the Department of Health and Human Services. And that responsibility extends not only to our American Indian, Alaska Native populations, but also to our Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. And so in that chair, I would see the same advantage to our Native Hawaiian programs as I'm discussed here today for our American Indian, Urban Indian organizations.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Case. I now recognize Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. As we heard in last week's hearing on Native youth and mental health, COVID-19 has had a devastating disproportionate impact on Native communities. In fact, Native Americans in Chicago chart a 15% COVID mortality rate, but numbers could be higher given the disaggregated information is not as readily available. COVID-19 did not cause these disproportionate outcomes, rather it's exposed longstanding systemic inequities. Even before the pandemic, resources within the health system were stretched thin. Notably, the ability of urban Indian organizations to provide cost-effective health services has been jeopardized by the lack of FTCA coverage commonly afforded to other federally funded Indian health programs. This should not be the case, especially during a pandemic. Some questions. Admiral, thank you for joining us today. Your testimony mentions that some urban Indian organizations have had to cut or reduce services like dental care to purchase liability insurance. What are the options available to urban American Indian and Alaska Native patients seeking such care who cannot receive it at their local urban Indian healthcare clinics?
Thank you, Congressman Garcia. For eligible American Indians living in an urban center, and if an urban Indian organization is not available to them for dental, their choices would be to either pay for those out of pocket if they don't have health insurance or health coverage, or to travel a long distance to a the next closest tribal health program that did offer dental services. So if we take Chicago as an example, individuals would have to travel to far off locations like Wisconsin or Minnesota to one of the tribal health programs that provided dental health services or pay out of pocket there in downtown Chicago.
Okay, thank you. Can you also speak briefly to the impact that COVID-19 has had specifically on urban health communities?
Sorry, Congressman, can you restate that?
The impact that COVID has had on urban Indian communities,
Okay.
the most salient features so
yeah,
far.
Appreciate that. We definitely have had clusters of positive cases in some of our urban centers. Most notably, and the example that I'll use is with the Santa Clara program out in San Jose, California. They were one of the early clusters, that program has done an exceptional job at meeting the needs of the patients served there with ramped up testing. And we've been working closely to make sure that we get them the PPE that they need. But across all of our urban centers, we are seeing great testing capacity being built, mainly through the provision of Abbott ID Now analyzers. But the hotspots kind of ebb and flow, if you will, depending on the location. Phoenix, Arizona right now is in an uptick with the number of cases being reported in that state. But we've got other locations throughout the country where they have been the priority previously.
Thank you. We cannot afford to leave urban Indians without access to health care during this public health crisis. Specifically, urban Indian health centers play a critical role in providing health care to Native Americans and remain on the front lines during the pandemic. It's time to bring parity into the system, especially as they suffer shortages, closures, and financial hardship as a result of COVID. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. And now recognize Representative Soto for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to see how tribes are treated as compared to states with regard to these healthcare reimbursements. Parity is a growing concern here in Congress to make sure that our tribes and our territories are being put on equal footing with our states with regard to a lot of these inequities in our system. Rear Admiral Wecke, what happens when we have VA and DoD transfers of service members and veterans to state health departments or other similar state run agencies? How does the reimbursement work in that sort of scenario?
Thank you, Congressman Soto. And if I understand your question correctly, the referrals from the DoD or VA to a state-managed health program?
Or a similar situation, but instead of a transfer to the tribe, let's say it's the situation where someone is being transferred to the state or a state institution or a state health agency. How does the reimbursement work currently between DoD, VA, and states?
Okay, I see. Well, for the most part, VA reimbursements are provided to community-based organizations that have a contract directly with the VA. So if there's a service that they can't provide within the VA system and they need to refer out, or if the veteran lives in a location that's more than 50 miles away from the closest VA facility, VA would reimburse for those services. For the DoD, they use the TRICARE program, especially for the beneficiaries of active duty. So those individuals who may not live with their active duty sponsor would have their services reimbursed through the TRICARE program. And similarly, they have contracts, TRICARE does, with various healthcare entities and would provide reimbursement. Now, with regards to the agreements that we've got in place now with the VA, with the VA and our federal sites and that the tribes have in place with the VA directly, We are reimbursed at an all-inclusive rate, which is a rate that is negotiated across the entire Indian health system of care that takes into account the cost reports from each of our facilities. And there's a formula that's used to devise that rate. I think the way that it would differ is that we use the all-inclusive rate, and these individual state entities or for-profit entities negotiate their rates directly with VA. VA, being part of the government, does have the ability to use the power of the purse and to require Medicare-like rates or Medicare Plus. So they can leverage their purchasing power to negotiate better rates than what commercial market might otherwise demand. But those are the most significant differences I see.
So before HR 6237 passes, there's a gap in reimbursement. So would this bill help to make sure that veterans and service members who are members of Native American tribes are put on equal footing now with those who live in the remainder of the states after this bill passes?
Yes, I believe that the extra emphasis on Native veterans receiving care from tribal health programs or federally run IHS programs, and then being reimbursed for services when those veterans have to go outside of the system, that would create parity no matter where the veteran lived, whether that was rural reservation or inner city.
And turning now to HR 6535, I represent Florida, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the Miccosukee have been hit hard by COVID-19. The president approved a disaster declaration even for the Seminole Tribe, and to a certain extent, they have facilities in urban areas. So how would HR 6535 help a tribe that is partially urban like the Seminole Tribe of Florida?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I think the most beneficial aspect is that savings of the malpractice insurance. $250,000 per site is a huge sum of money, and being able to use those funds to hire another physician or additional service lines would enable them to see more patients or to provide greater levels of service.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Thank you, Representative Soto. And now recognize Delegate San Nicolas, who will be joining us by video.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay over there?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
we can. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. My line of questioning was similar to my prior colleagues in terms of the parity between the care that veterans are receiving on Indian tribes versus states, but I kind of wanted to look at it from the other angle. I know that veterans who are living in foreign countries are also able to avail of a different federal program under the VA called the Foreign Medical Program. And one of the things that I think we need to really consider is when we're talking about our Indian tribe lands, those are sovereign lands. And so is there any benefit to extending the same kind of consideration to IHS that is given to all other qualifying providers under the Foreign Medical Program? I'll posit this question to the Admiral.
Thank you, sir. And I think that would have to be something that we would have to investigate and really wrap our arms around. I'm not sure, and I just turned to my colleague here who manages our Resource Access and Partnerships Program. I think we'd need to investigate that a little more before going on the record about it.
Okay, well, that would definitely be something, Mr. Chairman, that I would like to kind of put on the table because at the end of the day, you know, we have a unique situation here where, of course, the Congress having plenary power over the tribal administration, we can definitely impact IHS through the legislation. But at the same time, if we can have the sovereign status of our tribes fully respected and have the VA in interacting with our IHS in a manner that they would with the health services of any foreign country that was providing services to our veterans. And if such service provisions were more advantageous for those veterans, that's definitely something that I would like for us to keep in mind. Admiral, another question I had, because I'm unfamiliar, do we have active CBOCs in our on any reservations in Indian country? Community-based clinics?
Yes, I am not aware that we have any active VA community-based sites. I know that we have a number of partnerships. I'll point to the Hopi healthcare system as an example, where the Prescott VA program has, within that health center, developed a telehealth room where they provide services to eligible veterans. But in terms of a CBOC proper, VA CBOC in an IHS reservation, I am not aware that we have any.
Okay, okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I would also like to put that on the record. We do have CBOCs in our territories. We have a CBOC on Guam. We also have a CBOC on international in an international country in the Philippines. And so, in the interest of trying to secure more veteran support within our tribal areas, and with tribes being similar territories in their administration plenary by the Congress, I don't think that there should be any restriction to us having CBOCs being considered for placement within Indian country. That is all, Mr. Chairman, unless there's anyone you would like me to yield the remainder of my time to.
No, thank you, Delegate. Much appreciated. Now we will recognize Representative Cartwright for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my first question is for you, Admiral Wiaki. I read your testimony. Thank you for that. In that testimony, you stated that, quote, urban Indian organizations, UIOs, are an integral part of the IHS healthcare system that provide high-quality, culturally relevant healthcare services, unquote. I want to give you a chance to expand on what you mean about the importance of culturally relevant healthcare for American Indian and Alaska Native patients.
Thank you, Congressman Cartwright. And as noted, we consider the urban Indian organizations to be the third leg of our Indian health system stool, with both our federally operated sites and tribally operated sites making up those other two legs. Culturally competent care is vitally important. As it's been shown in research that care that is specific to an individual, not only the holistic approach of looking at that person's mental health status, physical status, social status, but now new and emerging, we're looking at trauma, past traumas, and how those impact an individual's health. So having a good understanding of where that person came from, what their upbringing was like, what their cultural norms are, all play a vital role in helping to improve that individual's health. And having urban Indian organizations who are trained and many of them come from the communities of the individuals that they're serving helps people to heal faster, better, and to maintain that community connectedness. Many of our urban Indian organizations serve as the community hub in the metropolitan centers.
Thank you for that. And my other question for you is, how might a failure, I mean, what we're up to here is extending Federal Tort Claims Act coverage to the UIOs. How might failure to do that jeopardize urban American Indian and Alaska Native patients' access to culturally competent and relevant care?
Thank you, Congressman Cartwright. I think as malpractice insurance costs continue to escalate, the purchasing power becomes less and less. And so they have to take away from other services to make up those increasing costs. That's one aspect. It also becomes more difficult to recruit providers. Some malpractice insurance only allows you to have a certain number of providers, and and then you're topped out, or else you have to go to that next tier of insurance level. So some sites are not able to recruit additional providers simply because they can't get beyond these ceilings on their malpractice insurance coverage.
So you save those malpractice premium dollars, but you also maintain accountability through the Federal Tort Claims Act.
Absolutely. In the same way that the Health Resources and Services Administration has that accountability for community health centers.
Very good. I appreciate that, Admiral. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Cartwright. If there are no further questions, Representative Case, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Simply put, I neglected to ask for unanimous consent in my questioning to include in the record a July 22nd, 2020 letter from Papa'ola Lokahi, which is the organization responsible for administering Native Hawaiian healthcare centers and other Native Hawaiian organizations, and asked for that to be included.
Without objection, so done. Great. And without any other questions, I want to thank the first panel witnesses for answering our questions. The members of committees may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Now I'd like to transition to our second panel of witnesses who will be testifying remotely. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes. You may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. I recommend that members of witnesses joining remotely first use the grid view function so that they may pin the timer on their screen. After the timer has been pinned, I recommend that members and witnesses switch to the active speaker function so that you can see those who are speaking from the hearing room. When you begin, the on-screen timer will be counting down and will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. When you go over the allotted time, I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished witnesses. The chair first recognizes the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, so we introduce his witness. Got you by surprise.
Great America. Andy Tuber, Great American, he's the one that's been leading this consortium. We have better health care, I believe, in any place in the United States for Alaska Natives. And he's asking us for a little piece of property to make sure we can do it more efficiently. And so, Andy, you're up as far as I'm concerned. Is that true? Is he up first?
Yeah, we'll recognize Mr. Say his name again, I'm sorry. Tuber. Yes, Mr. Tuber first.
Andy, go ahead. Did he hear anything?
Ranking Member Cook, Congressman Young, thank you for the kind words and introduction. Members of the subcommittee, my name is Andy Tuber. I am the chairman and president of the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of HR 7119, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium Land Transfer Bill of 2020. ANTHC is a statewide tribal health organization that serves all 229 tribes and more than 178,000 Alaska Native American Indian people here in the state of Alaska. ANTHC and South Central Foundation co-manage the Alaska Native Medical Center, the tertiary care hospital for all Alaska Native and American Indians in Alaska. ANTHC also provides statewide health services, including construction and operational support for rural sanitation projects and technical assistance to other health organizations for maintenance and repair of regional hospitals, clinics, including construction of new facilities. If enacted, HR 7119 would transfer 2 parcels of land which are located in an industrial area of downtown Anchorage from the Indian Health Service to the consortium via warranty deed so that the consortium can more efficiently use the properties. Currently, our Division of Environmental Health and Engineering use the properties for a variety of purposes to support the mission of ANTHC of providing the highest quality health services in partnership with our people in the Alaska Native Tribal Health System. The upper lot is just over 2 acres and has 2 buildings on it, which were built in 1974. The largest wood frame building is 4,400 square feet, previously used for equipment, maintenance, storage, and a couple of offices. It is currently used as a transitional warehouse for materials and supplies and equipment support for sanitation projects in over 180 of our rural communities. The second wood frame building is 2,304 square feet. It houses an electrical, plumbing, and fabrication shop. And the facility is primarily used to build and maintain control panels for water and utility plants in rural Alaska. The upper lot also provides space for approximately 20 shipping containers, which are used for storage of surplus construction supplies, which may be used on current and future projects. The lower lot is 1.5 acres and does not have any permanent structures on the property. The property currently provides logistical space for 40 to 50 shipping containers, which are unloaded and loaded for shipping to project sites, along with space to maintain heavy equipment in between being shipped in and out of rural Alaska for sanitation projects. This lower lot has been essential during this pandemic for us to receive, store, and distribute supplies such as hand sanitizer or others to rural communities which, for lack of water or sewer infrastructure, rely on such supplies to ensure the prevention of the spread of disease. The properties were used to support two recently completed projects, one in the village of Ambler, the other in Kivalina. For the Ambler biomass project, we completed construction of 4 modular shipping containers, which were staged in the lower lot and shipped to the community from there. We also sent 6 shipping containers containing our portable alternative sanitation systems to Kivalina, which will be installed in 45 homes in the community that are currently unserved. Currently, we have 9 other active sanitation projects throughout Alaska being supported from these properties in 2020. These projects are in the communities of Akiachuk, Kayana, Klawak, Elim, Lower Kalskag, Shishmaref, Fort Graham, Tutitlik, and Eek. The properties at issue in the bill are a valuable tool for us in providing health service to our people throughout the state. However, there are only a couple outdated improvements on the properties, and the consortium would like to improve those properties in order to better utilize them to support our mission. Obtaining warranty deeds for the properties before making improvements would allow us to both ensure ownership of any improvements and to obtain the financing needed for those improvements. I respectfully request favorable consideration of H.R. 7119, the Alaska Tribal Health Consortium Land Transfer Act of 2020, which, if passed, will improve the consortium's ability to successfully continue to fulfill the federal government's trust responsibility for providing for the current and future health care needs of Alaska Native and American Indians through the state of Alaska. I would welcome any questions of the members and appreciate the opportunity to testify here today.
Good job.
Thank you, Ranking Member Young. And we also have with us today Mr. Alejandro Benali, the Chief of Police for the San Carlos Apache Tribe, the Honorable William Smith, Acting Chairman of the National Indian Health Board, and Ms. Robin Sunday Allen, the Vice President of the National Council of Urban Indian Health. Thank you all for being here today. The Chair now recognizes Chief Benali for his testimony. Good to see you again.
Yes, Cora, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Alejandro Benali Sr. I am an enrolled member of the San Carlos Apache Tribe, which lies in San Carlos, Arizona, and I am a 28-year veteran of the San Carlos Apache Police Department, where I have served as a Chief of Police since 2004. I want to thank the subcommittee for scheduling this hearing and thank Congressman O'Halloran for introducing H.R. 958, the Native Youth and Tribal Police Officer Protection Act. H.R. 958 builds on the 2013 VAWA reauthorization by clarifying that tribes have the authority to investigate and prosecute reservation-based crimes against Native children and assaults on tribal police officers committed by non-Indian offenders. My written statement provides more details about our funding and facility shortfalls that continue to stress our ability to protect and serve our community. However, I want to focus my time today on the need to fix the broken system of justice that federal laws and court decisions have imposed on our people. The mere fact that we have to debate the need for police officers to protect themselves and children is disturbing, but this is an issue that my officers have to work through on a daily basis. In 1978, the Supreme Court basically punched a hole in our judicial system. For the past 42 years, we've been forced to rely on federal officials to prosecute crimes committed by non-natives on our reservations. It's not working. I must tell you that 99 times out of 100, unless we provide a federal prosecutor with a quote-unquote slam dunk case, the case gets declined and the offender is never brought to trial. Without any consequences, the offenders are becoming bolder and our communities are losing faith and trust in the justice system. This leads to victims refusing to report crimes, and which also leads to escalating violence. Anyone who lives or works in Indian country has seen the damage the system has inflicted through the crisis of violence against Native women. After decades of suffering, Congress passed the 2013 VAWA reauthorization to restore the ability of tribes to bring all persons committing violence against Native women to justice, regardless of whether they're Indian or not. 7 years later, tribal justice systems have proven themselves more than capable of providing equal justice to non-Indians. Now is the time to build on this progress by empowering tribal police officers to protect themselves and Native children. Again, it's troubling that we have to debate the need to protect Native youth and tribal police officers. But I tell you, the threats are real. My testimony cites several reports that confirm the disturbing rates of violence against Native kids. My officers see these acts of violence firsthand. The damage that it causes in terms of physical and mental harm, poor school performance, higher rates of substance abuse, and early entry to the juvenile justice system. I do know and do realize my time short, but I want to leave with you one of many incidents of violence involving St. Carl's children that my officers encountered. One day, officers received a distress call from a female tribal member who reported that she, along with her children, were being abused by their non-Native boyfriend. The offender had forced the girlfriend and her children inside a closet in her house on the reservation, where he continued to abuse them. The man, who had a background of mixed martial arts, began to attack a 12-year-old boy, the child's mother, who tried to stand up and protect his mom. When officers arrived on scene, and after a brief standoff with the officers, the defendant was placed into custody. But because the tribe didn't have the authority to prosecute, we referred the case to the United States Attorney's Office in Phoenix, Arizona. However, they refused to pursue the case because, one, they personally didn't witness the incident. Number two, they didn't believe that the crime was committed. With no other options, the non-Indian male was transferred off the reservation. Later on in time, the man reoffended, and he was actually banished from the reservation through the St. Carl's Tribal Civil Court. So again, this problem is real. This is just one example, and unfortunately, my officers have many more to share. And with that, in closing, I'd like to again thank the subcommittee for the opportunity today, and I am prepared to answer any questions each of you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. The chair now recognizes Chairman Smith for his testimony.
Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and member of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting National and Health Board to offer testimony to the bipartisan HR 6237 PRCs for Native Veterans Act. First, thank you, Chairman Gallego, for introducing this important bill. It will help stabilize the Indian health system and ensure that the VA is honoring its obligations to American Indians and Alaska Natives. Veterans reflected of the federally trust responsibility. The MOU between the Indian Health Service and the VA is beneficiary of both agencies, and more important, our honored veterans gain increased access to culture-informed care closer to home. The VA benefits by gaining an increased footprint, skills, and culture, a competent workforce, and more gain in capacity without incurring higher capital or training cost. It is good and effective use of resources and supports the range of care that our veterans are entitled to. This bill recognizes the federal government's dual obligations to Native veterans. One obligation is due to our political status as Native people seeping in the federally trust responsibility that existed forever. The other obligation is due to the Native veteran service in our collective national defenses. Native veterans have served in every major military conflict in the past 2 centuries. We enlisted at a higher rate per capita than any other group in the country. We served to protect the sovereignty of our tribes, tribal nations, and the entire United States. Despite the strong commitment to protecting our country, Native veterans face some of the biggest challenges in access to quality health care from the VA. That is unacceptable. When receiving care through the VA outside of tribal sharing agreements compared to other populations, our Native veterans reported longer wait times, more challenging in scheduling, less satisfaction with how healthcare problems are explained, less respect from VA employees, and the feeling that VA employees don't accept us for who we are. No veteran should have the feeling this way. Shamefully, our Native veterans experience this more than any other VA population. Our tribal sharing agreements have addressed these problems. By law, our Native veterans are entitled to health service from both the VA and the Indian Health Service. Also by law, the VA is supposed to reimburse Indian Health Service, tribal health programs, and medical services provided to Native veterans. That care and the VA obligations to Native veterans does not end when they exceed the services offered by IHS and tribal health programs. Sadly, the VA has constantly claimed that there is no legal obligations to reimburse IHS or tribes for specific or referred services provided through IHS and the tribes. HR 6237 is so important because it clarifies in federal law that the VA must reimburse IHS and tribes for care provided for the Native veterans directly by IHS, tribal providers, and on basis of a referral. This bill is so critical because IHS is extremely underfunded. In fact, many surprises how little funds IHS has compared to the VA. In 2018, IHS spends was nearly $3,800 per person. At the VA, it's almost $9,600. In fact, while the VA service population is only about 3 times the size of the IHS, their annual budget is roughly 13 times higher. This trend has continued under COVID. In the CARES Act, IHS received a little over $1 billion. In comparison to the VA, got almost $16 billion. What's worse, IHS has suffered chronic vacancies in healthcare providers. High vacancy rates means greater reliance on external providers paying for PRC funds to deliver healthcare. So when the VA fails to reimburse us, this means we have to ration healthcare. In 2019, federal IHS programs alone denied almost $616 million worth of care. This represents nearly 156,000 services denied in just 1 year. COVID has made the healthcare systems even more exposed. Some of our tribes have lost up to $5 million per month in third-party reimbursements, largely due to cancellation of in-person care, physical distance guidelines, and other safety precautions in response to COVID. Lower healthcare collections mean an even greater reliance on outside providers, as a program must consider furloughs or layoffs of internal staff. But when PRCs is already underfunded, our Native veterans are not able to get the care that they are entitled to and deserved. HR 6237 makes sure that the VA fully reimburse IHS and tribes for tribal referral services, and protecting our limited PRC funds and ensuring Native veterans receive the full range of care that are entitled to as a veteran. This is a common sense solution to a big problem. We urge the committee to work in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that this important bill is included in the next round of pandemic relief funds. Thank you again for inviting National and Health Board to this important hearing and looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much. And I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Sunday Allen for her testimony. Miss Sunday Allen for her testimony.
Hello and thank you. My name is Robin Sunday Allen, and I serve as the Vice President of the National Council of Urban Indian Health, NCUI. NCUI represents the 41 urban Indian organization UIOs across the nation who provide high-quality, culturally competent care to urban Indians who constitute over 70% of all American Indians, Alaska Natives in the U.S. I also serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic, a permanent program within the Indian Health Service, IHS Direct Care Program, and a UIO, which provides culturally sensitive health and wellness services, including acute, chronic, and preventative care to over 20,000 American Indian Alaska Natives. I would like to thank Chairman Gallego and Presiding Member Young for holding this hearing. My testimony is in support of H.R. 6535, the Coverage for Urban Indian Health Providers Act. H.R. 6535, a bipartisan bill introduced by Chairman Gallego and Representative Mullen, will close a major gap in the IHS system by extending Federal Tort Claims Act FTCA coverage to UIOs. This legislative fix will ensure that UIOs are treated fairly and equally as part of the IHS system. IHS Director Rear Admiral Weaki endorsed FTCA for UIOs on July 1st at the Senate Indian Affairs Committee hearing on this bill. He said, quote, "Our urban Indian organization partners are the third leg of our Indian health system stool, along with our IHS federally operated and our tribally operated programs," end quote. Currently, UIOs are the only providers in the IHS system that do not receive FTCA coverage. Given the dire strain of the COVID-19 pandemic on UIOs, this simple fix would allow facilities to redirect thousands of dollars in funds to needed health care. Both in this esteemed chamber and in the Senate, the coverage of Urban Indian Health Providers Act has enjoyed broad support, both geographically and across political parties. FTCA coverage for UIOs was also included in the IHS FY 2021 budget and the Tribal Budget Formulation Work Group's FY 2021 and FY 2022 budget recommendations. This extensive support shows that one thing is clear across the board: FTCA coverage must be extended to UIOs, especially during a crisis when it is needed most. At the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic, we have spent millions of dollars on malpractice insurance, money which would be more effective if used to provide culturally competent health care to urban Indians. If we were covered under the FTCA, we would put every one of these dollars back into direct patient care. We would also use the money saved to respond to COVID-19 and to prepare for future pandemics. We could use this funding to provide testing to urban natives who are more likely to experience severe illness or death due to COVID-19. Money currently spent on malpractice insurance could be used for PPE and disinfectants to keep our workforce safe. Without these additional funds, COVID-19 has forced UIOs to institute hiring freezes, and in fact, 83% of UIOs reported that they had been forced to reduce their services, and 4 have been forced to temporarily close. UIOs have also reported that they cannot hire additional providers as they cannot cover the cost of additional medical malpractice insurance, even as they are prepared to cover the new salaries. Urban natives face significant health disparities, including diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. These disparities place urban natives at a higher risk for serious COVID-19 complication. UIOs receive direct funding from only one line item and are not eligible for other critical IHS funding, including healthcare facilities, sanitation, and purchase and referred care. This fix is absolutely essential to enable us to continue to respond to the pandemic. We thank Congress for your support of urban natives, and we urge you to pass H.R. 6535. This simple, cost-effective fix will increase the services UIOs can provide and will ensure that UIOs are prepared for future public health emergencies. Too often, urban natives are left behind and left out of crucial legislation. However, we know that we can count on this committee to support urban natives' health care. We're grateful for this committee's continued support of urban Indians and dedication to improving the health outcomes of Indian country.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. I want to thank the second panel witnesses for their testimony. Reminding the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The Chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask of the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Smith, in IH's testimony, it was stated that the agency is working with VA to address PRC issues with Native veterans. To my knowledge, it has been a known problem for years that the VA is interpreting the law to mean that they do not have a statutory obligation to reimburse for PRC care. Is it true that the agencies could have fixed this problem administratively and haven't, question mark? Sorry, reading directly from the script here. And why do you think a legislative fix is necessary here instead of waiting for an administrative action?
Thank you for that question, Chief Bills here. At one of the meetings that I finally had with the VA and the Indian Health Service, my suggestion was them to tear down their towers and start working together. Because up in Alaska, we have worked when Sergeant Eggert was creating an MOU with the Indian Health Service. We have enhanced the footprint from the VA from just a few to over 200 places where the VA can, a veteran can be served, any veteran, Native veterans. But to answer your question, no, they can't fix it without legislation. I've been on a few of the committee meetings asking the VA and the Indian Health Service, why haven't they worked on this MOU to service the Native veterans and the veterans themselves? Thank you. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I actually gone to a couple, went to one hearing at the VA to actually push this through an administrative process too. My bill will include medical transportation costs for Native veterans as a reimbursable service from the VA. Can you please expand on why it's necessary to cover transportation services for IHS and tribal clinics? And can you give us an example? I think you kind of alluded to that already, but can you give us an example of when this might be necessary?
When a veteran needs to be transported to a deal, myself, to get to the VA hospital for any services, like I have to drive up to Anchorage to attend a VA eye clinic because it's not accessible here in Valdez. That's a 300-mile one-way trip. As of today, there's no air service out of Valdez because Raven went bankrupt before COVID. So it's either drive up or charter a plane out of here, and it's just time consuming and very expensive. So
that's a good example of when a veteran that needs to drive that much is going to have to make a cost-benefit analysis of whether they should even do it for that type of care when it might cost them more just in fuel to do it. So I'm glad that we're addressing that in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'd like to move on to Ms. Allen. Your testimony mentioned several healthcare services that Oklahoma City Indian Clinic would be able to provide if it were eligible for FTCA coverage, such as mammograms, pap smears, and dental sealants. Currently, where, if at all, do the Oklahoma Clinic's patients typically receive these services?
Thank you, Chairman Gallego, for that question. Actually, so there are several UIOs that do not provide those services. The Oklahoma City Indian Clinic is blessed to be able to provide comprehensive outpatient services. So we do provide those in-house, but there are a considerable amount of other UIOs that do not have those services.
Can you explain how, without the passage of legislation like HR 6535, many emergency supplementals directed toward urban Indian organizations, like those included in the coronavirus relief packages, might be just mere Band-Aid fixes?
Yes, anything that is not going to make FTCA permanent for our programs will just continue to just dig the urban programs deeper into historical of being underfunded, and that's across the Indian health system as a whole. But certainly if with 6535 passing, we would be able to put every single one of those dollars back into services, and that is most important for us, is to be able to take care of those patients that rely on us for their care.
Great, thank you, Ms. Allen. I now recognize Ranking Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andy, you heard testimony from the Admiral. How fast do you think that land can be transferred, and what are the concerns? To myself personally, I personally think 2 years is too long, but can you do it with 2 years? You want to do it sooner? How do you want to do this?
Thank you, Congressman Young. I appreciate your question. As you know, in 2013, we initiated a land transfer for the purposes of constructing a patient housing facility. And initially, that was done by way of the agency through a quitclaim deed, which later became a warranty deed through the legislation that you led. I would be happy to work with the Indian Health Service and appreciate the positioning that Rear Admiral Wiaki has described. If it took, it would be somewhat disappointing, but we would hope it could be done more quickly. Thank you for your question, Congressman.
Well, thank you, Andy. Well, this bill, hopefully with the chairman's help, we'll get it on the floor as we go through, if we can adjust it so you're acceptable. But again, I don't like to see agency slow walk something. I want to get it done. So by the way, your last transfer worked out real well. I have nothing but good reports on how it's been facilitated, and the results to the patients has been outstanding. So just keep us informed, keep working with the committee, and Chris Fluor is still my staff person, and let's keep it up to speed to get it done. So thank you, and I don't have any further questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young. The chair will recognize myself for 5 minutes.
Get out of here.
Chief Benally, my first question is for you. Your written testimony also mentions the facilities that your department is currently operating out of, specifically how they were meant for temporary purposes and are deteriorating. Can you speak to the difficulties associated with running a full police force in those conditions?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. This is Chief Benally. Currently, we are working in the modular trailers that was built by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Building 86, as everyone knows, was condemned in 2009, and we stayed in that building until 2015. Since then, we've been in trailers. The trailers have been deteriorating. The floors are giving way. Numerous plumbing issues. The most recent visit by Congressman O'Halloran, and his timing couldn't have been impeccable for him to actually endure the hardships that we have to go through every day out here in San Carlos. No electricity. There was no running water. He actually did a site visit along with his wife. Unfortunately, she was unable to use the restroom there because of the no running water. And there was a crack in my office from the settling of the trailers on the foundation. And to this day, that crack is still there. The generators, they're not providing enough power to the building. And just keep in mind that when the BIA decided to actually give us a Band-Aid fix with with the 18,000 square feet, they didn't take into consideration the tribal court system. They almost left out a whole department of 30 employees. And so we had to come to the table and speak on behalf of the court system. And that's where Building 5 came out of the BIA. And that's the building that we actually operate out of. And it's really hard to actually run a police program of 55 employees, 24 hours, 7 days a week coverage with that type of facility.
Thank you so much for that detail. My next question is for Chairman Smith. If HR 6237 were to pass into law, how would it affect the VHA's annual spending budget?
Thank you for that question. It would definitely help the budget because I, for one, use the VA and the Indian Health Service. And I just got a sheet of paper the other day where in Alaska, the VA did reimburse Indian Health Service for my trip to Anchorage to see my doctor up there. But with that being said, they do not really, well, they'll pay for transportation, but they won't pay for housing because they said they could fly you up and fly you back. But with COVID-19 going on, you can't fly up. So you have to do a drive up 306 miles to Anchorage, and out of pocket, you have to spend the night, because when I did my interview with the VA, I told them that I'm really tired of this thing called a suicide run, for a veteran to leave Valdez, drive to Anchorage, see the doctor, and then drive home again. I got a call from them, and the VA says, well, are you okay? Is everything all right? I use the word suicide because a lot of people have never made that trip back. Now we call it a turn and burn because the VA doesn't like the word suicide. But without housing for the veteran to be able to spend the night in Anchorage instead of driving up, doing an appointment, driving back, it's physically hard on your body, your equipment, and everything else. And we don't have the exact numbers, but there are great disparities in the funds between the VHF and Indian Health Service.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I have a few seconds left, Vice President Sunday Allen. Based on your experience, Chief Executive Officer of the Oklahoma, affected your clinic?
Yes. I don't have the exact fraction of that number, but I can tell you that yes, our malpractice insurance has increased 14% over the past 5 years. So it's becoming increasingly more burdensome for us to carve out that money that we wish could go back to direct patient care. And if it continues at 14% over a 5-year span, you can imagine the increased burden that it's going to cause, and especially for those UIOs that might be a little bit smaller than our program.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise it because I'm not sure if the panel can hear the questions coming in from the hearing either.
Yeah, sorry, sir. We're having some technical difficulties connecting back into the actual hearing room. So please, everyone, just stay on the line here.
Representative Garcia's question, you need him to repeat it. You did not. That was trippy. Ms. Allen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Did you hear Representative Garcia's question?
No.
Okay, Representative Garcia, could you please restart? And then we'll restart the clock at 5 minutes for Representative Garcia.
Gladly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank all the panelists that have joined us today and your important testimony. For Ms. Sunday Allen, have hiring freezes affected your own clinic too? One, and if so, can you speak to how staffing difficulties have impacted urban Indian organizations' ability to respond to the coronavirus pandemic?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. Yes, Oklahoma City Indian Clinic has been operating under a pandemic plan since March the 9th. And at that same time, we implemented a hiring freeze, thinking that we did not know how long the pandemic would be in place and making sure that we had enough resources to take care of our own staff. So while we have positions that we are funded for, we are not filling those positions. The same is happening across other UIOs. And as a matter of fact, I'm looking at some notes here from the UIOs that are saying that programs are also concerned about the mental health of both their staff and their community. In recent focus groups, programs reported that they are struggling to answer the question of how to take care of staff. It's not just patients going through this traumatic event, but also our staff. So it's very difficult knowing that to bring in staff during the middle of a pandemic, having them trained, and why we may have testing going on. If you don't have enough staff to perform the testing, it's not doing our communities any good. So yes, hiring freezes are rampant in the UIOs, and it's directly affecting our patient care.
Okay, thank you for that. Aside from bringing long overdue parity by extending FTCA coverage to urban Indian health providers, as would be done per Representative Gallego's HR 6535, in what other ways could Congress help urban Indian organizations receive resources that they need to provide care to their communities?
Thank you very much for that question. Certainly, we are grateful for the committee's continued support of our efforts to fix disparities, including 100% AFMAP for UIOs and reimbursement for services our programs provide to urban Indian veterans. The lesser reimbursement rate for Medicaid services and failure of the VA to reimburse UIOs means many UIOs have significantly less revenue, creating undue hardships when unforeseen emergencies occur like this pandemic. All healthcare facilities have felt increased burdens in responding to COVID-19. These burdens are exacerbated in UIOs as our facilities already operate with such little federal funding. For instance, many UIOs struggle to obtain necessary PPE due to decreased supply and significantly marked up prices at the beginning of the pandemic. The absence of parity in key policies compound on the decades of chronic underfunding of urban programs in the entire Indian health system. Ultimately, it is our American Indian Alaska Native patients that bear the greatest cost, and that is certainly a way to fix and to add parity is by passing HR 6535.
Great. Thank you so much. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. I recognize Representative Cartwright for his 5 minutes, and I apologize, Delegate. We are skipping to him because he is first on the votes with C's. I will go back to you, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the Honorable William Smith. Mr. Smith, you are the acting chairman, the National Indian Health Board. Am I correct in that?
That is correct.
Now, your testimony today highlighted the fact that Native veterans, as you say, quote, continue to experience among the worst health outcomes among all Americans, unquote. My question is, why has the National Indian Health Board found this to be the case? How did you get there?
How did we get there about being the worst people to get it? When you look at the VA budget and you figure out just in COVID that $16 billion was given to the VA and only $1 billion was given to the Indian Health Service, we are definitely way underfunded to receive the support and funds that we need, and that's why the data is very important that we get. So.
Okay, so definitely the funding is demonstrably less for Native American veterans. Is that correct?
That is correct. Like you say, when you even looked at the COVID, from HR from the IHS, from CDC, from health service departments, we have the lowest spending per capita in this country.
And in your written testimony, you state that American Indian and Alaska Native veterans should have the freedom to obtain care from either the VA or an Indian health program, and that this is not currently the case. Am I correct in that?
We as Native veterans earn the right to use the VA or the Indian Health Service.
And can you expand on how having this freedom to choose would improve the quality of the care that Native American veterans would receive, sir?
According to the Indian Health Service, extra-stations going on to people in 5.5 years, less than the national average. So, as a veteran, to be able to choose, just because our healthcare does not exceed the Indian Health Service, as a veteran, we earn the right to get the healthcare for what our government has put us through. I myself have died in Vietnam, but I just haven't been buried yet. Our government, with Agent Orange exposure and everything else, has really done our people injustice, not counting what's going on in today's world.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I appreciate your answers. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Cartwright. And I now recognize Delegate San Nicolas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first wanted to thank you very much for your leadership in addressing these issues, as well as the authors of the legislation that are bringing us here today also for the bills that they're moving through the subcommittee. I'd like to thank the panel for their participation and in answering the questions that have been posited. I did have one question that I just wanted to circle back on, and that is, if you'll afford me a quick second here. I wanted to posit this question to Chairman Smith. And this was similar to what I posited to the Admiral, Mr. Chairman, is the question of CBOCs, community-based outpatient clinics. Can you confirm that there are none in any Indian jurisdictions?
I, for one, do not know what the real answer is to that, but my support staff from the National Health Board will answer that question for you and give it to you in writing by the end of the day for the committee.
That'll be great. And also, if I could ask, do you have any data on the total number of veterans that are serviced by the IHS, and how many times the frequency of seeing those particular individuals and the dollar amounts that are spent servicing them through the IHS?
At this time, I do not have it, but my personal experience is that I see what the VA has spent on my Indian Health Service for the reimbursements with the Alaska MOU that we have with the VA. But that needs to be covered over the whole United States and our territories. So more data is needed to answer the question. And like it says, more research is needed to really answer your question.
Okay, and I just wanted to kind of see if we can find answers to those, because if we have a high volume of veterans in any particular reservation in the country being serviced through IHS, that could help us make a case, especially if those volumes are consistent with similar volumes where existing community-based outpatient clinics, CBOCs, that are being administered by the VA are registering outside of Indian country. Because if we have similar volumes in other areas that are receiving CBOC support, we really should make a case for us to get CBOCs into those particular Indian country areas that are experiencing those kind of volumes. So if we could try and get a handle on the data, I would appreciate it. But again, I want to thank you, sir, Mr. Chairman, for your testimony, as well as all of the panelists. And Mr. Chairman, I do not have any further questions. If you would like me to yield my time to any other individual, I'd be more than happy to.
This is Chief Bill, and I'd like to bring up some data that Alaska serves all veterans, and we need to serve more than 70,000 alone, but there's only about 35,000 of them that are registered. And that's why the tribal veterans representatives are so important, because there's lots of my Vietnam brothers and sisters that haven't come back to the table for what happened to us when we come home. And they are dying daily and not getting the services that they need and they're expecting. That's why the tribal veterans representatives are so important, to try to drag their uncles, their grandfathers and everything out of the woods back to the services. And that is one injustice that America has done to the Vietnam vets. We have gotten a lot better at serving our veterans coming home. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for your passion, your dedication. Thank you, Delegate San Nicolas, for your questions. I believe we have no other questions. I just want to thank all the witnesses for attending and continuing with your advocacy. As I stated before, the members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing. And the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.